Welcome to Queer Gerontology. I had to look that word up the other day, I'm not gonna lie. I had to look it up. I know you all might know it. I was like, gerontology, is that old people? What is that about? So I did. I'm your moderator, Antonio King. I'm with the Chicago Department of Public Health. I'm a public health administrator. And I'm gonna, introduce our two panelists, and we're gonna have a great time just having a discussion. But first, I really wanted us to give our sponsors, our promoters, our founders, our hosts a great round of applause, because I think this is a great 2 days that we're having for a very important subject, a very important topic, and I think that this is going to bring a lot of light, a lot of attention to this topic. I do want to say a couple of things on housekeeping. I think we all know where the restrooms are, right? No? Who does not know where the restrooms are? Okay, right out that door, the first code to your left, to your to your right is the men's and women's, and the code for the men's is 215 pound, and I don't know the codes for the women's.
115.
The power of communal, right. Secondly, this is being filmed for CNN. No, I'm kidding, not CNN. For it's for CAN TV, and as well as YouTube, so let's give us a hand for that. So know that what you're gonna say, your responses will be recorded. So the revolution will be televised. So I'm going to start out first introducing our first panelist, Dr. Magda Houlberg. She is the Chief Clinical Officer at Howard Brown Health Center. She's been there since 2011, and her role encompasses clinical leadership for medical services, including primary care, sexual health, and behavioral health services. Dr. Houlberg completed her medical degree at Rush University and Internal Medicine residency with a fellowship in geriatric medicine at Rush, and is board certified in internal medicine and geriatrics. Dr. Houlberg is certified as an HIV specialist by the Academy of HIV Medicine. Clinical and research interests include trauma, informed care for vulnerable populations, public health interventions, HIV care and hepatitis C, behavioral health, gender-affirming care, LGBTQ medicine, HIV treatment trials, and PrEP. Let's welcome Dr. Magda Houlberg. Our next panelist is Professor Ramirez-Valles. Did I say that right? Oh my God, I hated that. I've been practicing that 2 days. Okay, he's a PhD, MPH, is a scholar, filmmaker, and advocate of the Latino and LGBT health. He's the author of the award-winning book, Latino Activists in the Face of AIDS, and the Queer Aging, the Gay Boomers, I love that, the Gay Boomers, and the New Frontier of Gerontology, and creator of a documentary called now you know I can't say that, Just As We Are, on the lives of Latino gay men, transgender persons, and people living with HIV/AIDS. He was named one of the top gay Latino activists who has broken boundaries by the Huffington Post. Let's give him a round of applause for that. I think that's great. For more than 20 years, he has worked in public health in both the United States and abroad in a variety of projects ranging from reproductive health, substance abuse to HIV prevention, and economic development with women, youth, and gay and male populations. Also, he is the editor-in-chief of the journal Health Promotion Practice. He was born in Mexico, obtained his doctoral and master's degrees from the University of Michigan, and is a professor and director of community health sciences at the University of Illinois Chicago's School of Public Health. Let's welcome Dr. Jose Jesus. Oh my God. I've been with him for 2 days, and I've been doing this all for 2 days. I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. He called me Anthony, so we can go with that. Okay, this is the first thing. I want to start out with basically just asking each of you to define for us and help us to understand what the research and the practice of studying gerontology actually is. If you would start, Dr. Jesus. Oh.
How about mine?
Sure. So gerontology is this, oh, sorry. Ah, there we go.
On.
Yes.
There we go. So gerontology is just the study of aging. So it's a really broad field. So my area within that is the study of geriatric medicine, but gerontology covers a number of different specialties and fields. And so it can include anthropology, it can include any sort of studying or evaluation of aging. So it's a really broad and exciting field.
right?
I would say
That being
that's a
said-
definition of it.
And I understand that. That being said, how can we help to connect that study of geriatrics, gerontology, with what we're doing here at the summit this week?
Sure. So the history of gerontology is that, as many of you are aware, LGBTQ people, the irony of it is that LGBTQ people have been involved as gerontologists and geriatric medicine specialists for many years. So geriatric medicine was actually really one of the areas that physicians could specialize in if they were LGBTQ. Before that was really something that could be done openly. So it's always been known that geriatric medicine has had a really strong history within LGBTQ health, at least on the side of the provider or practitioner. But the irony is that the specialty has not included a lot of LGBTQ information. So the awareness around LGBTQ aging is really relatively recent, that there's really visibility. So a lot of what we see is what you're seeing in some other research areas, which is that it's very difficult to pull out LGBTQ populations from the data that we do have. And so people who are doing gerontology studies would need to think specifically about how to capture information about that subpopulation. And the fact that it's the disclosure and stigma works against you. And a lot of the systems of data collection that we used really would make it very much difficult for us to even go back and look at old data in this area. So some people will kind of refer to that as institutional erasure. So that's really when, if you don't ever capture the data, if you don't ever recognize that population from the very beginning, it can be extremely difficult to really piece together information about it. So some of the more exciting research, I think, is when people are working within gerontology and geriatrics in a specific area of geriatrics that doesn't have a lot of history within LGBTQ work, and they decide to either collaborate with an LGBTQ researcher or integrate some of that information in some of the great research that they're already doing. And so that can be really, I think, really, really exciting in terms of an area. And I think HIV and aging research is really it's very important medically from a medical standpoint, because we've learned a lot about the actual biochemical mechanics, the biology of aging from HIV. So there's really a lot of rich information to be learned from the intersection of that, both in kind of a biomedical model, but even in really all facets. So that's been an area that I think a lot of folks have been interested in.
All right, so I'm gonna go a little bit on the limb and say that I come to the study of gerontology, and I want to be a little humble with my new book, OUTAging. And for those of you that are interested in, we can talk a little bit more and tell you where to buy it. And just came out in 2016. And when I started studying older gay men, that's how I came to study gerontology. I realized that gerontology is an artifact of or a tool of power, and I would say capitalism and white racism in this country. Because it rests in assumptions of a particular way that the society had to be organized. It assumes that people are older and need help, and people are weak, and we need to institutionalize them and treat them differently. So that's what I sort of embrace the idea of we need to queer gerontology, that it needs to deconstruct the idea that people over the age of 55, somehow they become different. I don't know what happened with that, right? The idea of aging, to the moment we're born, we start aging, right? So this idea of getting old at a particular period of our lives is organized basically around capitalism, right? When we retire. And back in the day, people used to force to retire. Now we push them gently out of the labor market, and somehow we lose all their expertise. All the expertise that we accumulated over 55, 60 years of age, all of a sudden becomes useless, right? Or we become, less valuable to society, and they push us around. And the idea that we need to be separated from younger people. So that's what I become to the study of this, an idea, let alone that is based on a heterosexual way of living. right? That people age in couples within biological families, right? And we become grandparents. That is out of the window. Number one, because of the aging of the baby boomer generation. I don't know if those of you read in the New York Times, the census have a recent report that is more and more common, particularly middle classes in the United States, for older people not to marry. And it's the irony that as we say the collective, we fought for marriage equality, a bunch of baby boomers that say, you guys are crazy? Really? You're gonna get married? Because if you see the census data, older people are refusing to marry. They divorce, they have kids and say, we did it already. And what they're doing is not marrying it. Is that they're making these legal agreements to buy property, to rent house property, to take care of each other. But they are against the idea of marriage. So gay baby boomers are refusing these ideas. So gerontology, the study that we know of our grandparents, has to be gone. And I think we need to think about all the way of thinking that is more inclusive, that is less stigmatizing. Just thinking about geriatrics, so stigmatizing. I can tell you when I was younger, I do public health, and I have been doing professorial teaching academic work for 20 years, and we used to have a program in gerontology in my school of public health. We couldn't get students interested in it. We had to close it. Because young people, when we put the word older, aging, geriatrics, they run away. Nobody wants to do this kind of work, right? Only until we get to that point of like, oh my God, I really to learn this stuff because it's coming close to my door. But so we need to think about the way we treat older people, in particular we think older LGBT people, if we really want to sort of be more inclusive. So I'm going to stop there to sort of start the conversation. So to the point of how we think about gerontology and geriatrics, I really think it's a very old capitalism, white people's way of thinking of population.
You're right. No, you keep that one. You raised an interesting point, Professor, and was brought up in one of the sessions on yesterday. One of the gentlemen spoke about being in the boardroom or a meeting, and all of the surrounding co-workers and CEOs and COOs and CFOs were 30 and 35 and 25, and how he noticed how the power and influence of the older board members or executives was diminishing. And I thought about that when you were talking about the retirement, being pushed into retirement. Your influence is diminished. Your capabilities are condescended upon as if you're not capable because you're older now. You're 55. Oh my God, you've been on the board too long. Talk about since we've got a lot of providers, so talk about, you guys, what providers can do, doctor and professor, not you guys, can do, or what steps can be taken to kind of circumvent that. Either one.
Sure. I'll take a crack at it. So I think part of it also has to do with, I think it does go back to some of the separation of age categories. So when, I think particularly in Western culture, you don't actually really have that much contact with older adults, and younger adults don't necessarily recognize that as being odd. But being in I have been at Howard Brown for I think about 10 years now, and it tends to be a younger organization, right. Meaning I'm working with a lot of really folks where this might be their first professional role. And I have noticed that it is actually, sometimes it feels a little bit like a novelty to interact with older adults, because there's not actually a lot of natural areas where that would happen in our society. And that's a big problem, because I think then it does lead to maybe a pattern of behavior where people are not listening to someone based on the way they look, or really the packaging that they're coming in makes their words less powerful or less insightful. And that's really, a lot of cultures don't embrace that type of viewpoint because they're really looking at older adults as a resource. So being able to really mentor people, being able to bring some of the personal experience that we value. And so the irony of that is really within LGBTQ activism, we do value a lot of personal experiences, sometimes over maybe academic learning. And I think that's a strength. But when it comes to older adults, the question is, do people recognize that, and do we really learn about what people have gone through in the past. And I would say no, because I've had certain interactions with folks where we've kind of go over what the pink triangle is, like the things that I feel like, wow, if you're LGBTQ, someone should have told you about this, or maybe you would have come across it or seen it in an old picture. And so it's really interesting because I think LGBTQ history is really an important part of that. And I think it also does maybe gives people a window to sort of open up more appreciation to what people have experienced. So for geriatrics, the first thing we do with geriatrics in terms of training is really is more around history. So when we get a patient that was born in 1930, there are certain things that we know actually have happened medically based on the history. So some individuals have had hysterectomies. There's just been trends within medicine where you're like, I'm pretty sure you've had a hysterectomy because you're X age, And so I think those are really, with LGBTQ aging, we definitely see that as well, which is when people are in certain cohorts or generations, they do have common experiences depending on where they have come from or grew up. So a lot of geriatric medicine is really trying to understand where people grew up, what they experienced in their younger life, what they bring to the table. And you can learn the most from that, I think, from a clinical standpoint. But that's also a thing that, a lot of times there isn't time within a clinical environment to kind of have that kind of conversation. But in an ideal world, that gives you a lot of information. But you do gain, with familiarity, you gain an appreciation for working with older adults. So I've definitely found that with rotations with medical folks, or when they've done their geriatric medicine rotation, by the end of it, they feel so much more comfortable. The other part, which I think is really interesting for me, that I found fascinating about geriatric medicine, is the intersection with ability and disability. So a lot of times when we design geriatric programs, we do look at a lot at the physical environment. So you assess someone, and do they match their physical environment, or do we need to adapt the physical environment to the person? Do we need to adapt the person to the physical environment? So that really interfaces a lot with working with folks in terms of disability work. And so we do a lot of that naturally in geriatric medicine. And our society thinks of things very differently. So if I'm hard of hearing, for example, or I can't hear well, as a younger person, we manage that incredibly differently than we do when someone develops hearing loss as an older adult. So even within how we choose and discuss adaptive technology, a lot of that is bound to values and systems regarding, with aging. But the other part is that geriatrics is really about good design. So good design actually helps everyone, and that's the irony of that as well. So we see a lot of patients that seek out geriatric medicine, and they might be young because some of the adaptations are already built into that environment. But good design helps everyone. And the other thing we try to talk to people about is the fact that when we design spaces, bigger lettering, more clear direction on where to go, better direction on sort of how patients flow through spaces is stuff that everybody of every age could use, even if we kind of attach that to being designed for older adults. Good design really helps almost everyone within the space. So those are really interesting. I think there's a lot to be learned from different intersections with geriatric medicine.
And Professor, I want your comments as well, but as we're doing that, I want to make sure everyone knows that we're going to do a Q&A. So if you've got questions or comments, because I saw a couple of people put their hand up, as you're talking and giving your comments, I'm going to walk and we're going to use this mic. I'll take it off, and I'm going to take that one with me because he said that one needs to be as well. Go ahead, Professor.
The question is, what would they do? It's so hard, right? You went through a lot of stuff, and I'm like, yeah, checking all the boxes. It's like, yeah, you could do this, you could do that. It's hard. So I come from the public health perspective and the more social sciences, and I think personally one of the things that I have been learning a lot is about my own ageism, and how I see older people as different, and they are not. I'm learning a lot about that, and basic things, like when I walk the street right now, I see how much the light lasts, for you to cross, and most lights are not done for older adults. You have to do fast like this, or able bodies, right? All the way to say able bodies. So things like that. When I move out of my house now, I look at how am I going to age in this place? Can the wheelchair get through here? Those kind of things. So that's just to general age, right? And older age, quote unquote. But also within the LGBT community, I think we have tremendous problem with ageism, the same way that we have with racism, right? And we talk about it yesterday a little bit about the idea of race and ageism. I think we as a community, this is a great space to do these kind of things, right? To sort of think about how we, within our communities, we push people that are not 55, 35 and older away, right? And how we, as a collective, we, older folks, gay, lesbians, transgender, and bisexual and other parts of the queer community, how we struggle to be part, to still belong in that community against age, right? How we fall into the idea of, surgery, medications, drugs, whatever it takes in order for me to stay as a member of that community, right? Because the community doesn't like older bodies, right? Mm-hmm. When I started studying this book, it was very fascinating to me, and I tell the story in the book of I started looking at gerontology, geriatrics with my colleagues, and of course there was nothing looking at queer people. It's like, you think everybody's a grandfather and a grandmother and they have kids? That's what you read, right? And then when I started looking at queer literature, studies in LGBT, they didn't think about older bodies or disabled bodies. Everybody was kind of, young, 30s, 40s, active and productive life. And it's like, wow, these guys are not talking about these guys and vice versa. So it's a huge work that we have to do and bring both things together, right? And I think this is the big generation change that we're experiencing, and I think it's in all our hands to do it because we have tremendous resources just by the size of the baby boomer population that is aging.
Thank you. Wasn't there a whole generation that said, don't trust anyone over 30? Aren't those people that are older now? Those are the baby boomers? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Good luck with that. Okay. Did anyone have a comment or question? I want to go on, but is there something? Because I thought I saw someone raise a hand and put it down. No? Yes, I'll be right over. Can't talk without the mic. I'm going to do the over Phil Duncan. Carl, are you there?
Fine. One of the areas that I find lacking, and I wish there were more time devoted to, even with my own gerontologist, is the issue of emotional and sexual connections in later life. 55 doesn't mean that you lose all interest in sex and relationships.
55. I'll be 55 in December. Thank you.
In middle of the older.
Well, that's a very interesting point because I didn't know that I have been referred to a doctor. The health plan that I'm a part of switched locations or something, and my doctor left to go be with Doctors Without Borders or something like that. And the new doctor, he looked over my history and said, "Oh, so have you started Viagra yet?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "Aren't you like 52? At that time I was 52. I said, "Yeah." He said, "We need to talk about Viagra." I said, "No, we need to talk about some prostate exams, and we need to talk about some other things. My sex life is fine." And he said, "Well, in a few years you won't be able to do some things." And my next question was, "How old are you?" He was 43. And he looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry, I thought you were like in your 50s. I thought you were younger until I came in the register." I said, "But you looked at me and thought I was okay. But then you looked at my history and my age and thought, oh, he's older, so he's going to stop doing some things in a few years." I said, I know people who are 75 having sex, and they don't all need Viagra. And for me, I thought it was funny, but then I got in my car and I got insulted. I'm thinking, well, damn, who are you to tell me, because I'm 52, I'm old, I'm decrepit, because that's what I started thinking then. You're just saying I'm going to be broken down in the next few years. And I thought that was very insulting, and I'm thinking, if I'm getting that, not that I'm great and special, but if I'm getting that, what about someone who is visibly older and is probably still very sexually active and walking around? IML is something that there are a lot of older gentlemen who are going to be very active tell them they're not having sex and you're not doing anything, what are they doing to other geriatric clientele who are not as vocal as me?
So
Anybody, somebody.
I think, so it is common when I work with older adults that they, some of the biggest questions are really around finding a sex partner or finding a partner to be intimate with. So that's a lot of the discussion has to do with availability of partners. And some of that, I think that it's not so much function or disinterest. I think it's availability and really the culture finding it appropriate for older adults to express sexuality, and that can be in a couple of many different ways people can express sexuality, including sexuality with themselves. So I think it's really the biology behind it. A lot of times people do point to biology and they go, well, the biology says this and that, and that actually isn't really true. So some things might take more time in terms of sexual performance, but there isn't really a lot of evidence that things just go away, that sexual desire goes away. I mean, I think a lot of that is a cultural construct that we have, and a lot of fear around sex and sexuality in older adults, which is really found to be threatening. So when you go through the Hallmark card store or wherever, right, when you look in the, birthday section, you find a lot of sort of jokes around older adult sexuality. And so any kind of older adult sexuality that's portrayed as sort of comic, is cute. And that's a concern because we're working with, it's very demeaning to older adults. And so I think that we do, as a culture, I'm hoping we can celebrate sex and sexuality or recognize it or not be afraid of it, through the life cycle.
I like your experience with that.
Because
I have similar experience but with my in-laws, with all that. But it also points very interesting to me that how we have gone to that point of, thinking that once you reach the age of 60, sex and sex desire is gone in penetration. But all of a sudden, why men want to have sex and Viagra becomes very popular, right? And all of a sudden we think, oh, we all can have sex, right? So it's like nobody thought about women or other people. So one is how interesting it is that now, thanks to the pharmaceutical companies, penetration continues to be very popular after the age of 55, right? And the idea that sex has to be penetration, right? And the new generation to do that, right? And now they want to sell to us. The other idea that I want to point out is this idea that the book is based on interviews and fieldwork that I did with older gay men. And a very common thread around them, and the question that I ask them is, if I were to ask them at the end of the interview, what's your greatest regrets? What would you have done differently? The number one is, I wish I had a partner, a couple, a person. It came over and over and over. I'm alone, I don't have anybody to share my life. And I'm like, am I just gonna write a Hallmark card in my book? Like, oh, let's just get together and be happy of the need to have somebody. And what I realized is, and this is something that feminist literature has said a long time, is there is this stigma of being single. Our society has created us cultural discourses and economic processes for us to live in partnership. Think of everything that you can, that's why we wanted marriage equality, right? Because it was societies based on you being with somebody. If you're single, you're a failure. You are either incompetent to have long-term relationships, incompetent to love someone, incompetent to be committed. And women have been for a long time, feminist women, trying to find an alternative discourse to this idea of, I don't want to be with anybody. I just want to be single by myself, period. But it was stigmatized. And now that we're finding alternative discourses, primarily coming again from women, of being single as a choice. And this is the way I'm going to be happy, and this is going to be alone. So we need to sort of think about those two things when we think about older adults, and everybody else. Nobody wants to have sex, although the pharmaceutical companies want us to have sex and Viagra. Being single, it might be very, very liberating in many ways, right? Talk to women that are divorcing at the age of 15, 60. Most of my friends and sisters of my age, they all got divorced. And they said to me, finally, I'm able to buy the car that I wanted. I'm like, really? Were you, in those all lives that I see, those 25 years marriage and with kids, you weren't able to do your choices? No. And they were educated women. And it's like, so we need to sort of get rid of this idea that we have to be happy because we need to have, or we need, in order to be happy, we need to have someone to share our lives. It has to be one person, not 3, not 4, not 5, that has to be married, and we have to have sex. Some people want to have sex, go ahead, but we cannot let the doctors tell us, this is your Viagra, you gotta have sex, if you're not having an erection, something is wrong with you.
You raise an interesting point. Our American economic system is based upon rewarding those who are coupled and married. Income tax, some things, basically you get more rewards and such when you're coupled, as you speak. Also, I wanted to go also talk about, you spoke about the females. Yesterday in one of the sessions, in one of the sessions there was someone who spoke about constantly being asked, right before surgery or an exam, about pregnancy, and just totally disregarding the fact that maybe this woman is a lesbian and pregnancy is not something that's happening to her. That's another, I was looking at you while you're talking about clinical quality improvement. So I want you to speak on that, doctor, as well.
Sure, I think, oh, gosh, it keeps going off, okay. Well, I think that the issue is really more around assumptions that are made based on the way people present. And so I think that kind of goes back to that, which is in medicine, that there may be assumptions based on the way people look, and a lot of the forms and systems that would that someone would interact with are not really set up to capture that information. So a lot of hospitals and medical providers are sort of set up to ask certain questions, which the basic assumptions, are sometimes incorrect. So I think that a lot of that is a systems issue. Some of it's a training provider issue in terms of how we ask questions. And it's a language is always kind of an evolving thing. So when you gather, a sexual history, it can be very, it's great if you can do an open-ended sexual history, but sometimes that's difficult, meaning sometimes people need specific questions, or else they just have no idea what you're talking about. Like if I'm like, could you describe the gender of your sexual partners? People are like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? I don't understand what you mean, what that question even means. So I think that there are different questions depending on where a patient's kind of coming from or where someone's coming into that system. But yeah, there's a lot of assumptions I think that we, probably all make that are incorrect and not. I'm always surprised at how much people don't see what's right in front of them. And we definitely see that a lot. I've seen that a lot with transgender aging. So when people get admitted to the hospital, so we have patients that really wouldn't necessarily bring that up about their identity, when they're admitted to a hospital. But you'd be amazed at how many people have had, they've had catheters placed, there's lots of invasive exams, but people see what they expect to see. And so it's kind of interesting how that can be, even in the medical profession, that can kind of go unnoticed. And so we've definitely seen that where people have kind of gotten colonoscopies and never was it really brought up, either by the patient or the medical professionals didn't, they didn't notice ultimately that maybe someone's anatomy didn't match, the way that they were presenting.
Magda, could I ask one
Sure.
corollary question? I'm sorry.
Laura. Let Laura talk. I want to reiterate what Jesus was saying about being single and as a person who's not looking for a partner. What I get is a different version of what's wrong with you. It is, what do you mean you don't want a partner? Just yesterday someone said, you have all these wonderful qualities. I'm a great person, so I ought to somehow want a partner, because not wanting one must mean that nobody wants me, rather than that I don't want that. And I'm curious, I know, Jesus, your work is on men, but I'm curious about whether there are differences in the research between women and men, about how they're treated by the medical profession, or how aging is addressed.
Yeah, Yeah, I think I get a lot of assumptions. People sometimes will assume that someone older or is widowed. I've had that kind of phenomenon where they're like, so there's a lot of assumptions based on either widowed or divorced, and then that's the end of the conversation, meaning that there's no sexuality there, there's no even possibility of anything else occurring. And so it's, people's sexuality becomes so invisible when they're older that it's not clear that that comes up in some of the conversations at all. But I can understand there's a lot of peer pressure around that. I mean, there's a lot of peer pressure and a lot of discussions around what should and shouldn't be. But yeah, I think as a society, I do see that a lot, which is that the assumption is sort of like, this is a problem we need to fix. So I have somebody, I can introduce you to someone, like, I have a great friend for you, like that kind of thing. And it's not always, that isn't when, it's very different if you're beginning that conversation with like, I'd really like to meet someone, But when when that doesn't even come up and that kind of comes up as like, this is clearly a hole in your life that I'm going to try to fill. So, it's very
I also didn't
weird.
say I didn't want to have sex. I said
Right.
I don't want to have
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah.
those are two totally different things.
Yeah.
But people conflate them.
Yeah. If I could give a couple of comments, I think I want to come back to Magda's and your question about the assumptions. I think the encounter of the patient and the healthcare provider is so fraught with difficulties, and I think the collective, we queer people, LGBT people, are in a position to question those encounters. Because they're based on assumptions of heterosexuality in many ways. And that's why we have to have these conversations, because we're facing a system that is not created for us or by us, right? So it's constantly confronting that system. I can tell you the first time I just turned 51, that I went to a colonoscopy. It was traumatizing. For me, a PhD person that does this research, I ended up crying, and when my husband, I'm going in June, I told my husband, you're coming with me, and we changed physicians because it was traumatizing for me to have 5 people, 5 guys, and a nurse, a female nurse, with my pants down. Nobody's telling me what to do. So if someone like me confronts the system, it's something terrible with the system, right? And that's why we need to have these conversations and really change the system, not let the system normalize us, that something is wrong with us. It's just a system that is so difficult to change. It's so entrenched in heterosexuality that we need to sort of change. To the idea of the female body and the women and men, how they're treated differently, something that I think is very common, and I think something we as older LGBT people or the baby boomer generation can do, it can become a very powerful force, is that a lot of people that are aging right now, the baby boomer generation, they're realizing something that women and ethnic minorities and LGBT people have experienced, the marginalization of what it's like to be left out when you are 60, retired CEO, that nobody cares about you. And when I hear those stories, it's like, all right, so now, we can talk. And so I speak about the women's body has been, questioned and marked in so many ways, and that's how over history in the Western world we have been controlling women's body. So what happens with older bodies, we feminize the older body. So the older body becomes the same body as a women's body. Right? Something that we need to control because it doesn't have control, something that is weak. And so we need to fight that. And for me, seeing here, I'm very glad that I hope we merge, right? That the older folks that are heterosexual are finally realizing what other marginalized communities have said all along.
Thank you. I've got to get this book of yours. This is fantastic.
That is interesting. Magda, before we leave, my corollary question is, could you comment on the fact that many older people, without regard to sexual orientation, find themselves in sexually restrictive institutions, hospitals, rehabs, nursing homes, whatever, and yet we read of increasing rates of HIV and other STD infection in older people being a significant thing that's going on today?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is that there is not a lot of sort of prevention work done that's targeting older adults, and that's part of that phenomenon. The other thing is that I think there's definitely stereotypes within older adult circles that STDs are a younger person's sort of problem, and medical professionals, they actually perpetuate that frequently because they target a lot of their STD testing to younger people, subconsciously or consciously. So the fact is that you're less likely to get tested for, and less likely to actually get a sexual health screening done that's appropriate based on your age. And that's been studied as well. So it's been demonstrated that the likelihood of being able to get literally appropriate testing done, just based on age alone, decreases the older you get. So some of that that's a stereotype that then people kind of take and maybe think of themselves. So meaning as an older adult, if you're sexually active, you might be like, well, I could get tested, but why? This is not really a high prevalence area. I don't have that many partners. So a lot of those stereotypes do come back to hurt us across any age group. Because part of sexual health work is it's really, a lot of times people focus on one thing or the other. So they're like, the number of sexual partners equates to your risk. Not always, right? Because you could be in a high prevalence area and you could have one sexual partner and need to be screened. So that's really important. The restrictive environments people are in, I think institutions don't do well with sex and sexuality in any age group. So we do see that there's been some progress made, I think, in institutionalized settings in regards to like the right to have sex and sexuality, so the right to be sexually active, and to have that space carved out and to train staff on what that means and how that can happen appropriately in the space. And I think it's one of the reasons why, older adults don't want to be in an institutionalized setting, because it's like you have somebody who's in your business, right? Who you basically you're like, well, yeah, we need like an hour alone, and you have to talk to staff, but that doesn't, it's something, it's a private thing. And so the more heavily regulated the setting you're in, the harder that can be. So some institutions are better at it than others. So we've definitely heard stories of really good places that have carved this out, that are doing sex education, that are kind of doing affirmative sex and sexuality work within their older adult population in assisted living or in skilled nursing environments, particularly. So I think it's moving in the right direction. I think we've got a lot of ways to go. But yeah, the lack of sort of awareness of it being an issue or a problem is part of it. The lack of detecting, so the idea being that you don't get tested appropriately because your provider is like, don't worry, I'm gonna make that decision for you. I'm not even gonna offer it to you, and I'm gonna if you come asking for it, I'm gonna talk you out of it. So that we see that happening, quite a bit. People are much more likely to be diagnosed in a later stage. So if they learn of their HIV status, it's usually much later than a younger person in terms of their interaction. So they could have had many interactions with the medical community before they get tested. And a lot of studies have shown that, where individuals older adults are more likely to get to receive information about their HIV status from an institutionalized kind of ways, meaning that you apply for insurance. So you're going to get life insurance. They come and they do a health exam. That's one way that a lot of older adults kind of learn about sexual health when they even are getting regular care.
Thank you.
So my question is, so you talked a lot about how in American society, how we often view aging and perceive as well as treat people over a certain age. So I'm wondering, in some of your work, perhaps in other countries or in other societies, are there things that you have noticed, observed, or what have you, that you find insightful or that have brought a different approach, or some things we might want to glean or learn from?
I think I can tell you, number one, that institutionalization is very particular of the Western world and the United States, that we put older people in institutions. I mean, just think about it, how bizarre it is that you send people to, as if you were to send them to jail, you send them to an institution. Is so strange. You know, I'm an immigrant, I grew up in Mexico, and we had to put my mother in an assisted living facility out of the necessity, right? And it's so horrible. I mean, I still feel so guilty for doing this, and when I so visit, it's horrifying. I mean, I know that my views is infused with stigma and ageism and all that kind of stuff, but it's something that we never grew up with, right? Taken, you know, if we go back to Mexico, who's taking care of all the people? Women, right? So we had to sort of find that, right? It's another insightful thing, right? So that one thing here, we have sort of made some progress in making sure that women are always taking care of the family, although still they do. But also we don't go to the extreme in which we go to put weaker bodies into institutions.
Mm-hmm. I would say I would add to that in terms of LGBTQ aging. What's interesting is that younger people are often viewed within their own genetic families as being the one to take the older adult. So who's going to take care of mom? It's going to be the gay son will take care of mom, because they're single, even if they're not single. So there's a lot of really odd, there's a lot of odd phenomena that we see, and that we do see a lot of LGBTQ caregivers, and caregivers that are the same age as the person they're taking care of, because it could be a family of choice situation. And I think it's really, the biggest issue for me too is that our society isn't set up, they don't set you up for success, or society doesn't set us up for success in providing care for people in our own homes or in a setting of the person's choice. So you don't get set up for success, but who feels the guilt for that? Usually the individual people, meaning, people that have been, where you really are like, I need to keep my job, I need help to take care of this person. I need to keep my job or else I don't know what's gonna happen. And so institutionalization is set up to happen. It's set up to happen, and it's not an individual choice. You have to be exceptionally well off to really avoid it. And a lot of the problems with institutionalization kind of come up anyway. So I have, my wife actually works in the aging field, and she does caregiving, and she takes care of people from different walks of life, some of which are very, very, very wealthy, and a lot of, in an institutional setting, even all that wealth and all that resource, it doesn't go as far as you'd think. So our society is really set up that way, but the guilt is not carried by the society, the guilt is carried by the individual person who's like, there must be something wrong with me because I can't take care of this person at home, or I can't lift them, or I can't get the help I need. So it's really diabolical that way. And I do think we do see different things in different cultures in terms of health promotion. Some of that is that we learn how to age from other people. So what we're doing in this type of conference is really learning, how do we want to age? How do we want to teach each other to experience that experience? Because I think it can be, you can come into something with some really bad expectations and have that be self-fulfilling. In some cultures, people are working, they're working until they're 90 or 100. There's a lot of physical activity involved with their day-to-day work. It doesn't mean that people don't have aches and pains, or that there's a biology of aging that they're dealing with, because there is. It's how we experience that biology, or how we experience that, or frame that. And I do think no one would sit there and design institutions like what we have now and be like, yeah, this is how we're going to handle, this is how we're going to take care of people. Like, nobody would do that. Like, if these things have evolved based on our value, and they're imbued with the values of the culture, which a culture that doesn't, so really it's to demand better for oneself, or for, is a really, I think, a very strong political act. And I see it with LGBTQ older adults, because they're like, no. They're like, no, I won't do that. You're not going to talk me into doing it that way, because that's a bad, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to just go with the flow with that one. But yeah, I think LGBTQ people carry the burden of caregiving much, much more than the general population, and I don't know that that's completely, recognized.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I just want to get over here. If you'll introduce yourself and say who you're representing, because we have many providers in the room, if you guys don't mind.
I'm Jill Gover. I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm a safe care trainer. There's the training. And I want to come back to what you talked about earlier about ageism, and particularly ageism among gay men and older gay men who have tremendous pressure within the gay community to age in a certain way, and they often feel invisible or undesirable, and there's a tremendous message there that becomes sort of an internalized aging. Like, aging is bad, but it's for so many reasons, right? And I wanted to ask you if you had some strategies clinically in terms of how we approach that issue, specifically among men.
Oh, wow. I don't know how to do it clinically, right? That's not, unfortunately, you're probably more expert than I do on this. I think, part of what we have been talking this couple of days here is how can we create that intergenerational community that we need to create, right? So someone mentioned the bars yesterday, how you walk into side tracks. And I have not been there in years for a reason, right? Because you don't belong there anymore. But how are we going to be creating these intergenerational spaces, right? I think what we have been doing, for example, the Center on Houston and Howard Brown, creating spaces for older folks to come together, they're important. But the thing that we need to move forward is the intergenerational, right? How we can break that piece, right? For gay men in particular, I think it's more difficult than for women. I'm going to make probably generalizations on this, because many of us, gay men, part of the queer thing that we did is that we have sex with no strings and we develop wonderful friendships out of that, right? So you go to the bathhouse, or you used to go to the alley, or you go to the trucks to have sex, and your best friendships will come out of that. So AIDS destroyed that thing, right? And this idea of marriage equality destroyed that thing, right? If I'm having sex, I'm being monogamous, I'm being blah, I'm having race for HIV. So, and if I age, my pool of sexual partners, gets decreased, because I don't like to sleep with people my own age. Have sex. I want to have the younger ones, but the younger ones don't want to have sex with me. So who am I going to have friends with, right? So that's a very important tool for gay men that he's taken away from us by the cultural, the social circumstances, right? That our access to friendships have been reduced tremendously. So I think that the key, if I were in the clinical side, will be how do we help people to create these intergenerational spaces, right? And we have to rework, because I go back to Magda's point, is it's not the fault of the older person, right? That he or she got to this point. Is that we need to work with the younger people and with our institutions, that they are the ones we have to make the move towards, right? It's like this idea, of same thing with HIV, blaming people for their HIV status, right? Like, well, it's a condition, it's a disease that many of us can have. The same thing with age, with older gay men, right? The circumstances and what they're going through right now is not of their own making. So for us, putting more and more pressure and telling them how you need to cope with this, it helps us so little, right? The larger thing is what work are we gonna be doing so that when, I'm 80, the younger people are not still thinking, that I'm, just an old body waiting, to be incinerated.
You said bathhouses and alleys. Okay, I'm not judging. What kind of work or processes are being done? This was brought up yesterday on one of our sessions as well, to assist, if the providers are doing if anyone else knows, to assist our LGBT veterans who are going through their own aging process as well, but also dealing with post-traumatic stress syndrome as well. I think we have a question. Think on that. We're going to have more.
Yes, Laura again. Again, Jesus, I understand your research is about men. I would like to actually talk about women and not how men are feminized so that they become women. Women live longer than men. Women who are partnered with men are likely to be alone for a long time. And I'm curious, and then you can't play softball anymore because you're old and you can't do it. It's lovely it's important to pay attention to what happens to gay men as they age and how their social world changes, but what about queer women who also age, and our social world changes, and even though I have many friends in their 30s, the world is not set up for me to have friends in their 30s. And they're not friends with me thinking 10 years from now they're going to take care of me. Well, no, seriously. And so I would actually like to hear something about women.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's somebody, John,
You want to put the mic?
What happened? Oh, there we go, I'm sorry. I was trying to find out what softball means, too.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kat. I'm only 25 and I'm non-binary. I use they, them, theirs. And in line with the representation that I've noticed, it's not just an issue of queer women. I've only seen one speaker here so far, both between today and today and yesterday, who's openly identified as anything besides cisgender. I have not seen anyone openly say, oh, I'm not lesbian, or I'm not gay, I'm bi, or I'm pan. And that concerns me as a pansexual, non-binary person who was assigned female at birth. This is terrifying because even at this age, there's no space that blatantly says, yes, we're great for people who are like you. There are a lot of people who are like, oh, well, you're not gay or lesbian, so you don't belong here. Or, well, you're not straight, so you don't belong here. There's a whole lot of, well, yeah, you're non-binary, we accept your gender, but I can't date you because I'm gay and I only date people with dicks. It's upsetting that no one's really addressed this, and I still don't even know what trans care is available for people who are non-binary. And I'm only 25. Where are the people who are older than me, who have the same identity? Are any of them here? Were any of them invited to talk?
one of our lunchtime speakers.
Yeah, the lunch speaker, yeah.
They're recognized.
Yeah, there was one. No, I noticed yesterday we had one, but they weren't even on. We had one speaker yesterday, but they weren't even on the original schedule. They showed up because another speaker couldn't come, and that was almost more upsetting.
And the organizers are here, they hear you, I'm with you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Breathe. But you're here, you brought that point up, so guess what? It shouldn't be a point again.
That's the hope.
It shouldn't be a point again, thank you. Thank you for that. We said yesterday in one of our, and I think the plenary, our community is not just the LGBTQ. It's in layers. We can't lump ourselves, and we're guilty of it in our community, so we do need you to speak out. We need people to bring that to our attention. We need people to bring that up, to know that these, I'm a layer. I'm a layer. I don't see me here, I'm a layer. Thank you.
But I want to say again, this is the second time in this session that I've asked people to talk about women, and no one has fucking talked about women. I want to hear some, do you have clinical experiences with women that are different from men or anything at all?
Well, I think I interrupted that, I'm sorry.
Well, no, you let somebody else who had a valid point
Okay.
make their point, but that's the thing.
Sure. So I can talk about older adults who are women, who identify as women. So the literature is that there are probably older, for LGBTQ, bisexual, and lesbian cis women, they're more likely to be partnered as older adults. But ultimately, I think the experience is different. A lot of what I see in clinical practice are really looking at the lack of sort of spaces for women, so that are women-identified spaces. And I think that I hear a lot about the fact that there's not a lot of social activities that are geared towards that generation. And so I think that that's been a thread. A lot of I do take care of a lot of trans-identified older adults, those that both have transitioned many years ago, those that are currently in gender-affirming care or seeking that. And I think in those situations, I think that there's a lot of, being older can be freeing. So I've had a lot of individuals that have put off accessing gender-affirming care, or they've put off doing any kind of medical aspect of transition until they're older, based on some of that has to do with work, so some of that has to do with employability or employment. Some of that has to do with family expectations. So a theme that we do see is that the kids have gone to college, and now I can do what I've always wanted to do, and really always wanted to do. But you know, so there's a lot of sort of, I think that's been something we've seen where people have sort of put off their own identities or expressing their own identities based on what felt like constrictions of work and constrictions of biological families. And we see older adults that come out later in life. And I think that's definitely something where I think it's a very different experience. So to identify as bisexual or lesbian as an older adult when throughout your life you identified as heterosexual is a very different experience in terms of entering that world or being able to access some of that information. So part of it is also that we also are taught we were taught information about LGBTQ culture from other people. And the timing of that matters. So, for instance, if I've had experiences being, you know, an 18-year-old in Chicago, being lesbian identified, that's a very different thing than someone coming to that at 60 or 65 and then seeking out that information. So I think that so that's been, I see differences with that in terms of how accessible that information is. I've definitely seen that with trans older adults, meaning that for some, it is some of the medical interactions that we have are the only interactions that they have within an LGBTQ affirming environment. So when they come in, they're really looking to get a lot of information that is beyond medical, meaning a lot of it's supportive. Some of it has to do with how to survive, how to adapt, how does one accomplish some of the survival techniques that people are taught. So in terms of the way that we teach survival as LGBTQ people to each other, I think the age when that happens, I think, matters, and the context within that matters.
Thank you. I want to say something. I will say this, and I totally understand what you're saying. It's obviously a valid point because I don't think you still got the answer you were looking for. But this is the first, and I think that some of the points and some of the issues that have been raised, in all honesty, can be taken back and taken into account so that we can move forward with this. What we don't want to do is have anyone leave here feeling as if they were invisible. Am I right? We don't want anyone to feel that they were invisible. So if you've spoken up and if you did not speak up, feel free to speak with the organizers to say there's an evaluation form. And let's address that. But I want to thank you all for your time because the time is up. And I want to thank our panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? We can do a little better than that. They're sweating up here. Thank you very much. And I also, again, want to thank the organizers, but I also want to thank each and every one of you who came, who participated, who listened, and who took a lot of notes, I see, and those who were vocal and those who were not. Thank you very much, and we want you to stick around. The next session is going to begin, because I'm way over time.
Lunch.
12:40. So we've got, I can keep going? Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and enjoy the rest of the summit, you guys.